That'll do it, folks. Welcome to the stream. We got folks coming on in and seeing loads of folks who are either kind of mostly on the tired side for sure, and then happiness. If you got it, it's not a huge happiness. So we're happy to be here with you, folks. Though, here's the deal: are your political commitments something similar to the sports team you like, or movies you like or dislike? Is it a form of aesthetic expression, a hat you wear? I think all of us would like for our lives to feel more integrated, more whole. And so we have brought on some people to think about the question together. How can we afford not to be or not to be political in our professions? We had a serious decision to make in running this or not. First, there was a question, what if Biden wins? Do we run this? That was a major question we had. And let's see. If yes, we were going to run this show right here. Let me mute that. But if no, the question is, the answer was we're going to run the episode, unless of course Kanye won, in which case it was going to be like full on just eject the thing, buy Bitcoin and seed corn and bug out. Big questions there. So here's a quote from the end of the race. Barack Obama signed off with this, that you won't have to think about the crazy things the president says every day. It just won't be so exhausting if Joe Biden wins. I just want to suggest, hopefully, that we don't do that, whoever wins this, that we don't go back to ignoring the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania without discussing the matter first, you folks and me, the things that they do and how we can involve ourselves, our practice and our profession in it. So that's the only question today. We have some fantastic guests here to joining us to help us sort this out. We have a Desmos investor, a Desmos CEO, the Desmos CEO, and a Desmos fellow and fantastic teacher. I'm going to intro them all real quick and then share with you some questions that I was curious about. If you folks have questions, drop them in the chat. Would love to hear from you as well. Let's see. We got first up. We have Ulili Onovakpuri from Kapoor Capital, a general partner there, one of Desmos's very first investors. Thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today. These frames here were created. You might have noticed a little glow up from Desmos here today. These frames were created by Sebastian Mora, and they move around. So as you move yourself around, Sebastian has created them so they will move to avoid you, apparently. But we're happy you're here. Thanks for being here with us. Ulili, we'll be back with you in just one second. Making his Desmos Live debut happens to be one Eli Luberoff, CEO and guy who signs the checks around here. And then finally, just want to give a warm welcome to Christelle Rocha, a Desmos fellow from previous cohorts, one of the most interesting educators I know in the Southern California area and beyond, and a frequent intellectual partner with us as we think through the social obligations of our work. Thank you all for being here. Just first off, question to Ulili. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I want to share with you a couple of things you're probably familiar with that happened recently. We had the Expensify CEO emailed 10 million customers telling them, please vote for Joe Biden. We had the Coinbase CEO said, you know what, we're not going to be political at work. If you want to bail, you can quit. And also we had, of course, the Soylent founder endorsing Kanye West for president. I think one of you folks, can we mute yourself if you're not? I'm getting some feedback on one of you folks here. I'm not sure how we're gonna play that, but we'll do our best here. If you folks have headphones, that's awesome too. So my question for you, Ulili, please, is it possible to be an apolitical corporation? What are the upsides and downsides to swearing off political or social engagement? What are your thoughts there as someone who is invested in, let's see, I just lost Ulili from the stream. That's a pity. So going to come back to Ulili on that, first of all. Let me just jump over to Eli for a second here then. So Eli, here's the deal. Some folks noticed at the top of our banner today, or the last few days, we had vote at the top there was replaced Desmos. I personally urged us to vote a lot, but that was vetoed for I think aesthetic reasons with Comic Sans, and also because it's probably a felony. So we've done this before in the past. We had, one of our colleagues said this is a nice reason to love Desmos. People were into this one. We received no negative feedback off this from my read of the Twitter stream. We have had a message about the climate strike back in the day, about a year ago. That one had some negativity attached to it. So what I'm curious for you, please let us know, how does the decision get made to be public in that kind of way? And what are the considerations?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question. So the first thing is that making a statement like that is just one of the smallest things that a company can do. And one of the challenges that we have is wanting to avoid having it look like that is the extent of the action that we take. And I think we saw that recently with, Black Lives Matter strike, where every single company, including ones that have really horrible internal and external policies, were saying, like, we proudly proclaim Black Lives Matter. And so some of our challenge there is making sure that we're not being performative and doing things that aren't actually consistent with the work that we are doing every single day. And then another challenge, like you just mentioned, didn't happen with Vote, is that pretty much every time that we do something that is not strictly inside of the bounds that most people think of when they think about math, we get chewed out for it. People say, keep your politics out of my classroom. And there's this, I think, that's a kind of spurious idea, just its concept that politics is not part of the classroom. I think it is absolutely in all sorts of different ways. And yet every time that we make a statement like that, there's pushback. There's people who write in angry emails to us. And so each one of them we need to be really thoughtful about. And the other part of the challenge is that our goal as a company is we want to support every single student in their learning of mathematics. Students aren't the ones who get to choose what software they use. They aren't the ones who get to choose what curriculum they use. And so we also need to be aware that if we go out of bounds, there's a risk that students are going to not have access to this work that we're doing so hard to get them. And so how do we then decide which messages make it through those filters? And could address those individually. So the Vote one ended up being pretty straightforward. I think it's just uncontroversial that voting is a good idea. It's tragically a little bit controversial right now, but it really shouldn't be. And it's one that comports really deeply with some of our principles. And we often look back on these decisions to our equity principles on desmos.com/equity, and shout out to a number of folks on the team who were responsible for that prodigious work. But one of them is, we want our products to serve all students and teachers, and we think about Rochelle Gutierrez's different dimensions of equity. And some of them are things like access and power, and democracy is just such a powerful way to share access and power equitably across a whole society. So this one just felt pretty uncontroversial. Do you want me to dive into the climate
like that? It's like here's just to call out, like here's the NFL. Like it's fairly easy to like send out a tweet that says Black Lives Matter, or Vote, as you said, is like a fairly for a lot in a lot of ways it's a fairly uncontroversial message. I guess I'm also wondering, perhaps the people watching are wondering as well. If you have questions, drop in the chat. Like how else is this to me indicates a politics that is kind of an aesthetic expression. It's like a hat one wears. I know it runs, I'm not gonna say it only runs that deep, but I am wondering, and other folks might be as well, in what ways does the politics of this group of people that live on a ledger in a state incorporation registry, in what ways does it express themselves through product or through decisions we make or through hiring? Like, does this run deeper than tweets and messages up at the top of the website?
Yeah, I think if it doesn't, then you're doing it wrong. And this is something that we're imperfect about, and that I think every company is. But ideally, the stuff that you're seeing publicly in a message like that is just the very, very tip of the iceberg that you're doing on living your values. And in our case, it's things like wanting our products to serve all students and teachers. And we actually explicitly call out in our values wanting especially to work to make sure that we're serving well the needs of marginalized and excluded communities, for example. We have another one where we want to make sure that we're disrupting systemic inequities and conditions of marginalization in education. That's how we phrase that one. And so that is hopefully just the very, very tip of the iceberg, because a notice about a climate strike or asking people to vote is not going to do much to disrupt systems of marginalization. It's not going to do much to make sure that we're living our value of helping every single student learn math and love learning math. And so it needs to go much, much deeper, and it's a really concerted effort. And in some ways, I think those kinds of messages can actually undermine that work. You can think by doing this performance, you're doing the work. You're not. This is so, it's such a light kind of, some folks think of it as an alternative to actual labor to make sure that you're building an equitable workplace and making products that serve people equitably.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'd love to bring Christelle on, and Christelle, I'd love if you felt like you spontaneously respond to this company, that you've invested some time and energy into. Like, in what ways is this just performative? And Desmos should step it up. We'd love to hear that, of course. But also, I think you've been really thoughtful about teaching as a political act. And I was just looking around the internet. If you're on Twitter even a little bit, it's not hard to spot teachers who profess this idea that teaching is political. And so I just want to, a few of those. For instance, we have, like Jose Luis Vilson has written, an essay about this. You have folks like Shayna White has this as her pinned tweet, fantastic CS educator out in Georgia, I believe, and others. This right here, let me see. This right here is the question: do you agree or disagree with my politics are separate from my profession? And you have the majority of people here disagree with that and strongly disagree, but some folks do agree that politics should be separate from the professional. So I'm just curious. Let me, here's just one more also to call out. This is Google search results for a given subject is political. And so language is political is the top result there. And way down there at the bottom, we have math is political. So it just seems in the popular consciousness that people don't regard math as a political subject in teaching. When you hear that the words math teaching is political, what does that conjure up for you?
Sorry. So I think for me, it's a really messy question, and I'm trying to like bring it down to maybe like sentences versus like essays that I could talk about. But I really appreciate like the graph that you shared, because I think that highlights the fact that we need to have larger conversations outside of our schools, including folks to think about math as like a decision-making process versus like something that people are exposed to and just have to kind of do. And we think of politics are choices, right? Politics are things that we get out of, what kind of power we have. But I think that we know that politics and education are completely intertwined. And if we look back at like the history of how schools were started, it was all for political reasons. And so when I think about, for me, like in my context, I feel like a great amount of pressure to teach to a national curriculum. And I think that there's something to be said about that, right? If I make a choice as a teacher, I can make an impact in my classroom, but it doesn't necessarily mean that my students in the entire school are going to have the same access, or in the entire district are going to have the same kind of conversation in regards to, let's say, politics or the kinds of math content they're going to see. So I think that for me, politics can also mean pushing the boundaries of what our schools are doing. If you're not active on your school campus, please get involved, because that's a lot of what our students are experiencing outside of our classrooms, and it impacts the kinds of decisions that we're allowed to make. We can also think about the local politics, like if we just say Black Lives Matter or put that on a shirt in our classrooms, it's kind of like what y'all are talking about with the performativeness of that, which is to say that you can say that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're showing it. Like, what are ways you can hold space for the Black Lives Matter movement? What are ways you can organize around it and help your students do so? So I think for me, it's just really intertwined with so many things locally, nationally, and in our classrooms.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bring Eli back over here too as well, and we'll see if we can get Ulili back on. So I just wanted to call, like, if I'm hearing you correctly here, there's like politics, it expresses itself in like, the decisions we make around schools, like what curriculum is used, how long the school day is, should we be back in school right now, is a political decision. And then also kind of going, I'm seeing some comments in the chat, and I'll bring one in here from Marie Morrison here, for instance, is, if Desmos gets into partisan politics, then I will never use it. And I think I get where that's coming from. But I just like, it's not so much, I'm not hearing from Christelle, like, like vote blue, vote red, but rather the ways in which values, which are upstream from politics, then kind of flow through and animate your work. I'm curious, can you think of like pedagogical or classroom level decisions? We're still kind of like up here, like there's voting, and then there's like the school board, there's the curriculum, but like day to day, your classes, lessons you teach, how you teach them, like how are your political commitments expressed through those kinds of really just routine acts?
Yeah, kind of like I mentioned before, like there's this idea of politics and like what it means to folks in different ways. And I think for me, politics doesn't mean like some kind of partisan conversation. It really has never included that for me. I think when my students were asking me about who I voted for, I was like, you know who I'd vote for. And it's not because I've said it. It's not because of the kinds of things I tell them. It's the way I treat them. It's the way, like, my practices. So it's sometimes, like I said, holding space for events that are happening in their lives. If something happened in the neighborhood, we're not just going to act like it's not important. Or if something is occurring, like for instance with the election, we made space to understand what are the things that we're going to need to get through the week. That has nothing to do with my math classroom, right? So it's kind of bringing those things up, I think, shows students the kinds of politics that we're interested in, which is the kind of politics that would center them and their identities. I don't know if that answers the question, but I can elaborate more.
Yeah, I feel like you have like some very precious resources that you yourself get to decide how they are allocated. And one of them, as you've expressed here, is time. Is like what we spend our class time talking about. And I've in my time in the classroom, I feel anxious if we were not talking about something directly related to a content standard. And I think you're recognizing here, I'm hearing you say like that is learning, that's valuable for our community. Those are lessons that if I don't, spend time talking about the most important thing going on for students right now or things that they're anxious about, then I'm making a statement about the value of those concerns. Always really appreciate hearing you talk about all this, Christelle. Eli, any comments on Christelle here? We talk about your ideas a lot. How you, especially Christelle talked about how we used to have do no harm as a value at Desmos, and I think Christelle rightly called out that doesn't go far enough. That do anti-harm is more to the point of what's necessary, and those comments really occupy us for quite a bit. Eli, any comments here on the matter? You're muted, Eli.
Oh, that was such a good soliloquy, right? I don't even remember this sentence anymore. So building on what Christelle was saying, and I think also going back to what Marie said about partisan politics, and for me, the idea that a company would align itself with a political party, even in a really polarized time, is pretty kind of scary and distasteful. And so one of the things that we did as a company is we decided that in terms of partisan politics, the role that Desmos had was very, very small, non-existent, except in so far as we said that our team as individuals are the people who should be participating in democracy. And so the role of the company was to give people time off to do that. And we gave people 2 days around the election to participate however they want. And that could be, to me, that's what democracy should be. We can encourage people to vote. We would never encourage people how to vote. And that to me is really important. And instead, the positions that we take as a company are ones that, as Dan alluded to, are just kind of like one level higher. It's things like belief in science and belief in equity and belief in access, and some specific ones around that, that sometimes align with a specific party, but that's not why we take those positions. And having our values written out is really, really helpful for that, because when people sign on, we're not saying you should only come to Desmos if you're a Democrat or a Republican or a specific type of Democrat. We're saying you should only come to Desmos if you want your time and energy to go into disrupting systems of marginalization in education. And people of all different political persuasions could stand behind that vision.
So happy to have Ulili back on. Ulili, you are Kapoor said, I'll mangle the exact mission statement, but as far as venture capitalists go, I understand that you folks are deeply invested in supporting communities of color and companies that have a social impact. And so I shared earlier some screenshots of articles that you're no doubt aware of, various CEOs that either take a very explicitly partisan position, hey, vote for Biden so the economy will stabilize and my business will flourish, or hey, we're not going to talk about politics here. Don't ask us to make a stand, for Black Lives Matter or other kinds of concerns. Like, we're going to keep heads down here. I'm just curious. We've been moving between Christelle works with students. She's deeply enmeshed in the actual system, one level up. Eli's working on building a company that supports people like Christelle, and then you have a whole portfolio of companies. What is your advice for founders, for companies, and how they should interact politically in this current moment?
Yeah, I feel like industry is inherently political. Like, if you think of everything from how businesses are taxed, rules around how you can hire, and like providing insurance, again, like who's a contractor, who is an employee, like all that is through regulation, right? So I think it's a falsity to be able to say like, hey, we're just not going to be political, because the very nature of setting up an organization and registering it is a political act, right? You're participating in the system. So for us, I mean, I think what we tell our founders very early on is similar to what Eli said. I mean, I think you have core values that are important to your company, and it's kind of the foundation of how you operate, and most importantly, why you operate. I mean, I think what we look for when we invest in companies is not only what business they are creating, but kind of like what inspired them to create that business. So I feel like it's important for you to stand up for what you believe in, the fundamentals of your business, and oftentimes those are political stands, and I think that's important.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate those comments. And yeah, it often occurs to me that like Desmos, companies, like we're just a bunch of names on a list somewhere that's registered in some state as a thing called a corporation. And in doing so, like we're all tied into this, and it's very hard to, the saying we just can't opt out of it without going to the woods and creating a commune off the grid, let's say, which I know Eli would probably appreciate.
Even a commune is a political act, right? Like I feel like it's an establishment. Yeah. I feel like probably if you're on a like remote island somewhere, that's probably the only way to opt out of everything political.
Folks, who knows how this is going to go down? In a few days, we might know who's calling the shots around here. Tell me about it. Is it going to be time to go back to brunch? Can you imagine an outcome here at the end of this where you can say to yourself, like, all right, we can kind of like ignore the folks in the White House and kind of go back to doing our thing. What's your take here? You're going to feel some relief, or how will your engagement change based on whoever, if there is a change in the White House, let's say?
Is that question to me?
That question is to anyone. I'd love to hear from Christelle, actually. Christelle, I've been learning
I'm sorry.
In your Twitter feed, you've had some interesting thoughts I've been thinking a lot about. What do you think, Christelle? Time for brunch after this on Sunday?
Yeah, I think I love brunch, but I don't know if it's like, I know what it means, right? I know it means that we're relaxing, we're taking the things lightly, and I think that there's never time to take things lightly. And I think something that I've thought a lot about this week in particular was the fact that, my kids have been really struggling through the week, and I think there's been this mismatch of where our energy is in terms of me wanting to talk about the election so that way they can kind of be informed and not feel so stressed, or just kind of find some calm in the mess that it is right now. But at the same time, some kids are getting really overwhelmed by it, and they just need space. And so I think there's got to be some sort of balance. In every act of resistance, there needs to be joy. And so I think brunch can be the moment of joy, but I think we also need to follow up brunch with like real strong actions, making sure that we center the needs of students and the communities that we serve.
Thanks so much. Just appreciate all you folks coming on the call here and sharing from your perspective how things are going. I do hope you are taking care of yourselves, all you teachers as well. We saw from that chart earlier from the graph you folks made. Folks are very tired. Folks, if they're happy, they are not very happy. If they are unhappy, they're not very unhappy. People seem to be in a state of kind of just melancholy, which, that makes total sense. So do enjoy brunch. I'm going to say so long to all of our guests here. Give some love in the chat to them. Throw some thumbs up. Really happy for all three of you to make your featured Desmos Live debut, and I hope it won't be the last one. For my part here, what I'm thinking about is this graph right here. I did some Google searching, as you can tell. And this right here, I think, is what gets me most charged up for what happens in the future. You folks as math teachers, you have so much influence rather over how your students perceive themselves and their value and their classmates' value. This is not an error. You're not waiting for the language, science, art, and history graphs to show up. This sentiment that I am stupid is something that materializes out of the ether through no ill intent from anybody. Certainly not you folks, you good people who are on this call. So it occurs anyway, and people come to understand that there is a very distinct binary group of haves and have-nots in the world, and in the class, and perhaps in the world. And I, for one, am worried about the crises that are not going to end, perhaps, if we have a change of leadership in the White House, but the ones that will continue, including environmental degradation, income inequality, immigration crisis, deportation, incarceration, all of that. Honestly, if we can be really honest with ourselves here, the line on each of those trends that runs through Presidents Bush, Obama, Trump, and probably through a Biden administration, it's basically a straight line, or one that at least is accelerating through most of those administrations. And all those crises have in common this idea that there are people who are in and people who are out, people who are clean, people who are dirty, people that we can ignore or mistreat. And so I'm so excited that you folks have this role where students walk into your classes. If you're a ninth grade teacher, having 8 years of having internalized and metabolized this idea that they don't have value in this way. And you folks have the ability, and we want to support your ability to share with them their profound value, and a value that is so unshakable that no one would be allowed to take it away from them or their classmates. So I'm just signing off here. This has been the Desmos post-election wrap-up, and we're just always so grateful and profoundly humbled to be in community with you folks. I'm gonna hang out for a little bit here in the chat, but other than that, we'll see you next week for a new half hour and a fantastic set of new guests. Thanks so much, folks. So long.